It's my absolute pleasure to welcome back Anders Puck Nielsen to the channel, a military analyst and extremely influential YouTuber based in Denmark. He specializes in naval warfare and strategy, and that is good because we will be touching upon marine drones in today's episode, among other topics. We will also be talking about Pokrovsk and the change in military tactics that we're seeing as that city holds on against the odds, against Russian infiltration and bombardment. Before we jump into the episode, thank you to everyone who supports the channel, especially those who are helping to support my upcoming trip to Ukraine, where I hope to do interviews and filming on the ground, which of course represents its own challenges in wintertime and with the intermittent, I think, electricity breakdowns, as it were, due to Russian bombardment. But I'm immensely grateful to everyone who's gone on to Patreon, buy me a coffee to help make it happen, because these trips and the logistics are getting increasingly complicated to sort through, as well as filming on the ground. Anders, welcome back to the channel.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Well, let's dive into Pokrovsk. Now, obviously, land warfare isn't necessarily your absolute thing there, and we will come on to the marine part, but it seems that Pokrovsk has held out for 21 months, which is extraordinary against supposedly the largest army in the world. But we've seen other cities fall as well, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and many, many others. There is speculation amongst some Ukrainian and Russian military analysts, bloggers, etc., that the kind of warfare we're seeing is actually, the outcome resembles the same. The outcome is taken territory, cities turn to rubble, huge numbers of casualties. So ostensibly it's the same. But actually on the ground, they're saying the tactics are really starting to change, and drone warfare, with the absolute saturation of the battlefield with drones, and this transparency that this sort of almost all-pervading monitoring from drones comes. This is changing the tactics of warfare about how you infiltrate, occupy, and then hold territory. What are you interpreting about what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what worked a few years ago does not work today, and it is about the technology just changing the conditions on the front line. We are seeing how drones are making the battlefield transparent in a different way. We are seeing just the absolute saturation that you were talking about. Just the other day, I was working on the translation of a book I wrote about warfare back in 2023. And in that book, I was reflecting on the drones and how they were changing the battlefield and those things. And a number that I mentioned in 2023 was just to illustrate how dramatic the drone revolution was, that Ukraine had come to a point where they were using 10,000 drones per month. Right? That was a huge number. I remember when I wrote that in 2023, 10,000 per month. Wow. Today, we are at a point where Ukraine uses more than that per day, right? It's just amazing how the drone revolution has worked out over the last couple of years, and that just totally transforms the way that land warfare can happen. And what we saw in Bakhmut, there was lots of talk about the meat waves. Just Russians just keep on attacking and attacking like that. Today, what works is these very, very small groups, right? You had 2, 3 people that actually tried to get through and not being spotted, but while in those few minutes that they are visible for the drones, and then just trying to get in and then dig in, right, and just wait for more people to make it, and they might be lying there in a basement or for days and waiting for reinforcements, and then suddenly they can pop up somewhere and there's 10 people. You hear Zelensky talking about how there is 300 Russians now inside of Pokrovsk, right? You have a battle for a city like that, where you're talking about a few hundred people on each side actually fighting it out on what is supposed to be a big city in eastern Ukraine. right? You
60,000, I
have
think, was the pre-war population, 60 to 70,000. Yeah.
that was the pre-war population, and you have the Russians. There are different numbers for this. Some numbers up to 170,000 people engaged in this battle for Pokrovsk. But when you look at what's actually inside the city, it's a few hundred, right? It just speaks to how dramatically different the war is today, and how people are being replaced by robots, basically flying robots, driving robots, right? And it just means that the battle looks totally different from what you saw a few years ago in Bakhmut or Avdiivka. And it is the technology that is changing that. It's changing the conditions for how warfare can happen. And it's remarkable to see what's going on in Ukraine, how that's playing out there, but it's also it raises big questions about how do we translate that into a context where we would be fighting over NATO territory, for example.
And there's that incredible scene, wasn't there, of Russian troops heading towards Pokrovsk or a village north of it, which supposedly that was the geolocated point of it. And they were riding, motorcycles and scooters and really cars that looked like they're on their last legs. It was like a scene from some kind of a post-apocalyptic Mad Max kind of movie. I'm guessing that's not necessarily because that's all that Russians have, but they know that these vehicles are not going to survive. Their life cycle is hours. Once they've got those troops close to the objective, and then they'll infiltrate on foot, all those vehicles will be destroyed. So there's no point in sending anything new and shiny in there because it's going to be totaled almost instantly.
Absolutely. I mean, this is expendable stuff, right? And it's also something that they can only do because there was the fog. It's been very foggy for a couple of days. So that means that they actually could do that, because otherwise it would be even more primitive, just very small groups of one, two, three soldiers trying to make it. And you send in three, two of them are not going to make it, but one might, right? And then you do that 10 times, and then you have 10 people inside the city suddenly. And that's how you eventually get to 300. It's just a very, in some ways, bizarre way of warfare if you compare it to what for the last couple of decades has been like the gold standard of how we see modern warfare. It's definitely not like this, right? What we were imagining with these kinds of super surgical precision kind of operations, pilots in a cockpit and just targeting exactly the car or the person, or like these types of operations. And now suddenly you see this, right? It's baffling how this could be modern warfare in the 21st century.
And when I was at Brave One recently, and they described it as the war of ugly stuff that works. And there was a fair degree of disdain for the so-called shiny military products, so the nicely branded and packaged miltech, which of course many NATO countries are still investing or starting to invest actually new fortunes in. And this is a big area of debate, isn't it? Because if this shiny stuff is going to be turned to scrap, if we have with fly-by-wire and the hugely advancing, EW techniques, as well as this zoo of different drones, what we're looking at is this shiny stuff may not be able to operate in the 20 to 50 kilometer radius to any zero line. And Ukrainians are looking at it going, well, this may not be, are we investing for the previous war or the one before that rather than the current war even, let alone the one that's to come?
Exactly. It's really difficult. And also, I think the challenge that we have is that we can't necessarily fight symmetrically with Russia on this, because we don't want to get into this type of attritional fight where we're basically exchanging casualties, right? If we want to have a chance against Russia, we will need to find smarter ways to beat that, so that we don't have to send all those things into just the meat grinder ourselves. That's not that the for Western countries, that's not necessarily a sustainable way to wage war, to win a war, right? So we have to figure out what's the balance here. How can we actually leverage some of the old technology in ways where we wouldn't need to get into what Ukraine is into now. It's a big discussion. The fact that we have stronger air forces than Ukraine has, for example, would that mean that we could change the dynamic? How would having a stronger air force actually do that? It wouldn't necessarily mean that Russia could not operate those drones if we were circling around in on top with F-35s. We don't know exactly how that would play out. Um, but so I think it's a bit too early to just say, well, we don't need any of that shiny stuff anymore, because it might to some extent be the solution. But on the other hand, there is this uncertainty. We don't actually know for sure that it would dramatically change the situation.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute because it has relevance for marine drones. It has relevance for a whole load of different sort of platforms and investments, and indeed, it has some relevance to what kind of war we're fighting because we're still thinking here of fighting a conventional war with set pieces, and even what's happening in Ukraine sort of lulls us into thinking that we're still faced with a kinetic war where Russia is sending, large land forces into our territory. Well, actually, let's tackle that now. Is it not entirely possible that Russia actually fights the first full-scale hybrid war, sub-nuclear hybrid war, and a kinetic hybrid war, if that makes sense, where you have the hostilities that are taking place at the level of drone incursions, sabotage, terrorism, which of course they're testing contracted or outsourced terrorism using crypto to thugs, criminal networks. This is already happening now. And deep strike, long range missiles and drones. So you may not see set piece, but a conflagration could be designed to put so much coercive pressure on our economies and democracies that actually we move towards voting in extremists and voting in Kremlin compliant people who are going to appease, who are going to make concessions, who are going to fold. The next war may be nothing like any war that's been fought before.
It's possible, but I think there are also limitations to what can be achieved with hybrid means. And I think I would be very reluctant to say, give people the impression that hybrid war is like the worst thing that can happen, because I actually do think that kinetic war is a possibility. And I think that massively would outmatch hybrid war in terms of severity. And uh, I do think there is a possibility that Russia would try to push us into fighting a kinetic war and a war on their premises, which would be a war of attrition, right? To see how strong is our determination actually to help Ukraine, right? It's easy for us to keep supporting Ukraine, to be bold when all we have to do is give some money, right? But are we actually willing to sacrifice for this cause, which the Russians clearly are? And I I I I am concerned that at some point they might try to take this all this hybrid stuff that's going on right now and say they need to take it to the next level because clearly it's not working. It's not clearly degrading right now our willingness to support Ukraine. The European aid to Ukraine is still flowing despite all the things they're doing in the hybrid realm. Um, but the moment we actually have to send our soldiers into a meat grinder, such as what the Ukrainians are experiencing, that might actually change the political calculation in the West and say, well, this is not worth it for us. So I still think that the kinetic war is the biggest problem that we're facing. I do think it's possible that we will get into something like that over the coming years. Um, and then if I think that the technology that the big challenge that we really have from a technological point of view is how do we find out how we can still enable offensive operations? Because I think that's really what we're seeing in Ukraine, that this technology, it favors the defender, right? It has forced the attacker into attacking one, two, three people at a time, and no maneuver warfare. No, I mean, the other day I heard an expert from Rusi, talking about how clearly the weakness of the Russian military is the infantry, and how they are not able to coordinate big actions, and it's not prioritized in those things. And that is true, but I mean, I think it's not because the Russians don't understand that. It's just that they understand that this is not going to be possible anyways, right? So why would you put a lot of effort into training people that you know are not going to be able to operate the way you train them anyways? Because the only thing that currently works in this environment is these small, uh, dismounted attacks. And that's definitely not how we want to be fighting in NATO. It's against every doctrine that we have. And, uh, it challenges our way of thinking, and the fact that what we absolutely do not want to end up in is a fight where we have to be on the offensive to liberate something that Russia has taken, right? We want, if there is a confrontation, we want to make sure that we are the ones defending, and Russia is on the offensive. Um, and I don't know that we are necessarily prepared for that.
And that's if I've got that correct. I was hearing a military chap talking about this yesterday, and he said, the key here and NATO operations through the Cold War was we understood that we would not have the human mass of the Russian troops, but if you have mass turned into force, that could be deep strike, air power, etc. It's another form of mass, which means you need fewer people to potentially then push through. He made the argument that actually what drone is doing here, drones are creating an extraordinary level of mass. The trouble is what Russia now has is drone mass and human mass, plus all the traditional stuff, artillery and so on. So this is if they're able to combine that in a certain way, it could be a new, not blitzkrieg, because that's the wrong word. I mean, they're still 45 kilometers from where they started in Donetsk. They haven't really gone anywhere in almost 4 years. But he said that we need to watch that idea that they have mass squared or whatever it is, and be very wary of that.
Hmm. Exactly. And it's also a kind of experiment that we're doing, right? Because what is working for Ukraine is basically that they have the same, right? They have been building the same kind. They have Europe's second largest army just after Russia, right? So they have the mass and manpower that we don't necessarily have, even though, I mean, there are plenty of complaints about how the Ukrainian army is lacking manpower, but compared to us, they have a lot. And they also have by now the mass in drone production. They are getting there with long range missiles. We really don't have that, right? So uh, our plan apparently is to fight Russia with other types of capabilities that Ukraine is not currently fielding, right? And that is quite a bet, right? It might work, but it might not. And um, if it doesn't work, then you're right. Then Russia has all the high cards, right?
And another aspect of this, which is interesting, which at the moment is playing very much against Russia, because Russia's, if we look at the sort of the big geopolitical picture, they've always had a problem with, say, sort of access to export routes, maritime export routes. That's always been the big challenge for a sort of landlocked empire, and one that in the north is a big part of the year is surrounded by ice. Hence they developed their nuclear ice-breaking fleet, etc. And to an extent, it's those old sort of 18th and 19th century concerns that initially sort of drove part of maybe the reason they went to war, which is the Black Sea access, Black Sea domination. Ukraine, without a traditional navy, is not only, eradicated the Black Sea fleet, which we did talk about last time, the time before, but now they're hitting Russia's main oil export terminals. This is a battle Russia's losing and losing badly. But are they perhaps also learning the lessons from this? And will they develop their own drone technology, maritime drone technology, that could cause a major headache for Western powers?
Yeah, of course. I mean, they are absolutely studying what Ukraine is doing, and they have developed their drones. So we have seen Russian maritime drones also successfully hitting Ukrainian ships. The biggest difference is that Ukraine doesn't really have the ambition of having a navy that is present at sea, and therefore the development in naval drone technology it benefits Ukraine, right? Because Russia does have that ambition. But I do think that the important question to be asking ourselves is if we try to translate this into the confrontation between us and Russia is would we be able to do better than Russia is doing right now? Because if there is a war, this suddenly plays out in the Baltic Sea, for example, then we would be in the position that Russia is in right now. We would want to dominate the sea there and be present with manned warships, and Russia would be launching these things against us. So that is the big challenge we have in the maritime space. That we need to make sure that we can probably defend against these things and still operate and exercise sea control, and that's going to be extremely difficult because just again the technology here favors sea denial.
And you've mentioned in some of your commentary, which I find fascinating. I think you said that NATO has missed the drone revolution, but I'd also maybe go further and say it lacks some of the core components to kickstart it. Now, it's not impossible to join the race at a late stage, but we're just seem to be sort of joining that race now, and some of the more enlightened people are doing, co-productions as Denmark has led the way on that. Co-production ventures, innovation, and then testing in Ukraine, which is the strapline of Brave One. But there's some important stuff behind it. But I think what it seems from the events that I've been at and the conversations that I've had is that some people here are still missing the core component, is that drones isn't about a particular technology or a particular product or getting production lines up and running. It's about an entire end-to-end ecosystem. It's the full integration of civic society into a military supply chain, and the full connectivity to the testing, and then speeding the whole thing up so the unit cost comes down so that you're iterating on a weekly basis, not, every few months or annually or whatever it is. Do you think we're starting to learn that, or are we way behind on understanding that you need this entire ecosystem, which also requires engineers, programmers, strong civic society, an entrepreneurial attitude, etc., etc. Without all of these things, it's very difficult, I think, to reproduce. Or am I being, too harsh?
It's extremely difficult to reproduce, especially when you're not yourself in war. I mean, there's always this discussion about military innovation and how once you actually are in war, it's much easier to do these things. The pace of innovation just is much greater. The willingness to take risk to see what actually works, right? In peacetime, you have these very static procurement organizations that are very very careful not to take risks because they don't want these scandals in the media about how they wasted money and all these things. And you just have to, during war, that's not really a concern, right? You just need to make things work. So I am starting to meet more and more people who are talking about how we can build these structures, the production, the innovation facilities. So it's more like the production capability as the military capability, and how can we actually build systems that are ready to be, really work very fast to do these things, because we don't know where the technology is going to be on that day when the war breaks out. But we need to be ready to hit the ground running. And so I think we are seeing more and more of that. And then something I also think is really important to be aware of is, of course, we have Ukraine, which I think we should, in this sense, look at as being a part of the Western sort of community, right? That if we find ourselves in a war with Russia, it would be really silly not to consider this as part of the same conflict as Ukraine is engaged in, and maybe we can leverage some of the production facilities that Ukraine has, because they are producing so much right now that they are actually approaching a point where they could start exporting some of this technology and still have enough.
And another aspect which really came through strongly in the event I went to this week, because there were some people there from sort of Ukrainian sort of military supply side, and of course Brave One, which is driving this, is the gamification of war. And whenever it's mentioned amongst Western experts, there's almost an attitude that it's a little bit icky, a little bit like, well, yes, they're doing it and it seems to be working, but there's this discomfort with it, which is basically putting the price on every Russian you take out. Um, but it seems to be driving change, institutional change, behavioral change, but change in investment and the flow of funds. And I think it's not quite being appreciated yet how effective that actually is. The units that are more successful get more funds to buy equipment. That equipment gets rated on its success rate, and it's constantly in flux because that equipment might not be so successful a few months later or a different part of the front. But essentially, you've got this sort of marketplace plus gamification with state support. That seems to be quite transformative and seems to be a little bit. I get the impression Western militaries are intrigued by it, but a little repulsed by it.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the standard reaction, and not just among militaries, among everyone, right? It just seems there's something wrong about this, but I think ultimately that's not really a question about the gamification itself or the system. It's more a question of what does war actually do to the psyche, and how do you view the enemy, and the immense hatred that you will start feeling for the enemy, that you don't necessarily have before, that you just don't have, right? The dehumanization of the enemy that will happen in any military when you are against, you're engaged in war. That's why these things would seem perfectly normal in Ukraine, because you are killing the aggressor, you're killing the enemy. You're not really that concerned about that individual person's family history or what have you. But when you're not in the war, you're not at that level yet, right? You're not filled with hatred the same way. And so there are some things there that can seem a bit absurd from the outside, but which I think is just a very normal reaction to these things, right? You have these, um, yeah. I think it's something that you basically have to be in country. You have to really sense how deep felt that hatred is to the Russians, and that would make this absolutely perfect, right? Perfectly normal, right? You have Ukrainians taking pleasure in watching drone videos of Russians
Oh, there's
being
that. That's the
mutilated and
PR
killed.
side of it. I'm not sure that's the core motive of Brave One. I think it's an
Oh,
efficiency
absolutely not.
mechanism. It's bringing market forces, to
No, no. I think
yeah.
the reason why they have the system is because it's super useful, right? It helps bring these, distribute resources to the units that are most effective, right? Where can you get the most effect out of bringing your newest equipment? Who do you want to actually test these things? You need to know who is good, right?
And in real
Let's make a
time, you
ranking
can't do
system.
it over
You get
months
it
and
in real time.
years,
You
yeah.
It also is super efficient because in the sense that it motivates the frontline units to collect this data, to send it back in an organized format for analysis at the central headquarters, right? So you get much more data, you get much more documentation that you can use for all kinds of things. You can find out what actually works, how is the enemy operating here and there, and you get all this training data that you could use for AI, right? You get so many things out of this system. So it's very smart. It serves so many practical purposes. What I was addressing before about the hatred kind of thing, why is it that we are repulsed by this and the Ukrainians are not? And that's
Yes, yeah.
because we are not we are not there.
Yeah.
We are not in this war where there has been this effect of that really intensifies the hatred of the enemy and makes this okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a challenge, isn't it? Because if we're going to keep up, I mean, this the drone warfare seems to me that it's an evolutionary phase. As again at this event I was at, one expert was asked whether he would class it as a revolution. He said not quite yet, but certainly we're on the threshold of a transformational moment in warfare. He said possibly when you get highly networked, autonomous drone systems, that is, autonomous drone swarms, that's the point at which, and the unit cost comes down still further. That's the point at which you start to see, real revolution across the board. But if we are to, and I think we must seek to match Russia's malignancy by developing these systems ourselves. We're going to have to get over the ickiness and embrace some of these things, like bringing market forces to our not just our innovation chain, but our kill chain. Otherwise, we're going to be outmatched.
Absolutely. And there are so many levels in this, right? You said, well, we are not quite at the revolution yet. I think in certain ways we are, right? The ranges that these systems have, that's maybe not the frontline types of drones, but the long range strike drones, I mean, that is absolutely already changing warfare in a way where, you know, the consequences are immense. The fact that you're not safe just because you're removed from the front line, right? You can be here in Denmark, in the United Kingdom. We would be targeted if
Yeah,
we are in a war with Russia, right? People ask me, what's it going to look like if there is a confrontation here? And well, it's going to be in the Baltic states, right? Yeah, but it's also going to be here, right? Because
exactly.
and the consequences of this are just immense. And we are nowhere near where Russia is in terms of production capability of these long range strike things, right? If the Shaheds are beginning to hit Western Europe, we can't match that. We don't have anything that really can. I mean, our stockpiles of things that we can respond with are so small that in a couple of days we don't have anything left and we don't have any production lines. Right?
And there's a unit cost
So
disparity, isn't there? There's an asymmetry in unit cost where you could have a drone that costs a couple of thousand to Russia to produce, even one of those Geran, which people don't realize how massive those things are, and they've got quite a hefty, payload on some of them. You're looking at missiles that are costing tens, if not hundreds of thousands to shoot down something that costs a few thousand to build. We're going to have to get over that asymmetry, I think, as you say, to counter this kind of warfare.
yeah, the first thing is I think the idea that we can just build a drone wall, right? Or we can defeat this with air defenses. We're just going to shoot them all down. I think that the technology does not allow that right now. I mean, we might get there. We might invent cheap ways to shoot down these things. Ukraine is working on it, but we are not there yet. And that means that the only real response is actually kind of offensive response, right? The deterrence by punishment. That we can reply in kind, right? We can hit you as well. The challenge is we can't actually do that because we don't have those production lines. Ukraine has to some extent, but again, that that is Ukraine, right? Where is Western Europe in all that? We right now have a discussion in Denmark about long-range strike capabilities because the government wants this, and some people say, well, this is very aggressive. The Russians are going to see this as an aggressive move if we purchase these kinds of missiles. But that is just what modern warfare looks like as well. And what is it how do people expect us to be fighting this war if we don't have anything that can hit the enemy? Um, and again, we're probably going to procure like a really low number of this, so like, I don't know, typical Danish fashion, like 20 or something like that, maybe 50 missiles. But with the Russians producing several hundreds every day,
It's an average night
we
in
are
Kiev, isn't it? That is, they're all gone.
exactly, yeah, exactly. So I would say these things are already revolutionizing the way we need to understand warfare, but the revolution is not over yet. There are more developments coming, and so obviously we don't know where it's going to end, but that this type of warfare is different from any war from ever before. I think we can already point to things and say that, well, it definitely is.
And in the last bit, because I think I could talk for hours and dig into this in more detail. I think there's a lot of ways in which it could go, but let's also link that to the other aspect of where some politicians seem to sort of start to get Russia and its impulses, but many don't. And I went to an event this week, as I mentioned, at Chatham House. It was a sort of on the record event, so I don't mind mentioning it there. I won't name the individuals here, but there's a very senior analyst who, after listening to all these extraordinary Ukrainian voices, describing what Russia is, describing that this is a war not of territory, but of control, manipulation, erasure of Ukrainian statehood. At the end of all of that, plus endless discussions about how various processes to try and bring this long war to a conclusion have failed, because ultimately there's a disparity in objectives here. Russia has come to raise Ukraine, which it sees as an existential threat to its autocratic system. And how do you negotiate with somebody who wants to erase you? This is unfortunately the same problem that I guess Israelis will say that the problem with Hamas. Gaza aside, and Israeli heavy-handedness and populism, all the rest of it, and some religious extremism. Quite apart from it, there is the core problem, the elephant in the room. That how do you negotiate with someone who is really not interested in any concessions whatsoever? But at the end of this event, somebody popped up and said, "Well, of course, to achieve a durable peace, Ukraine is going to have to make some concessions." And it just seemed to me there are so many assumptions built in there, assumptions on our side about whether Russia will ever accept concessions, whether any treaty will ever be binding or will only contingent, and whether they will ever give up their maximalist aims, which I doubt. But also there was a completely, every Ukrainian there saw this moment, which was that if that statement were to be broadcast back to Russia, I expect it won't be because it wasn't being filmed, but if a Russian analyst was to see that, that's gold for them, because it signals weakness, signals absolute weakness, and an implication of almost capitulation to Russian methods. Again, am I being extreme here? Am I seeing the world in a Ukrainian kind of fashion?
I don't know. I think it's a very, I mean, the statement that that Ukraine will have to make concessions to Russia and then you can find some kind of common ground. I think that's actually both from a Ukrainian perspective, it's just absolutely stupid, right? This guy
Yeah,
does
yeah,
not
yeah,
understand what the war is about.
yeah.
But I think actually the Russians would agree that this guy does not understand what the war is about.
They'd
That
be delighted, right, to hear that. Though I mean, they like seeing weakness in their adversaries, just like that. Just as Chamberlain was received by Hitler in the 1930s, again perceived to be weak.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, from the other on the other hand, right, this guy is still not at all talking about concessions that Russia would actually consider valuable. Uh, this war is not about some cities in eastern Ukraine, right? If this guy were saying something that the Russians would actually like, then it would be some of the things that Lavrov is talking about, right? How we need to roll NATO back to the 1997 borders or things like that, right? Those were concessions that we Russia needs security guarantees in a new European security architecture, right? These are the kinds of concessions that the Russians are actually after. I don't think, honestly, that the Russians are all that interested in hearing that Ukraine would need to let them keep some cities in Donbass, because that's not what they are there for. It just mostly demonstrates that there are still analysts in the West who, despite spending a lot of their time following this war for now 4 years, still don't understand what it is about and what it would take to end it. And if I can then just spin into how do you actually negotiate with someone who wants to eradicate you and doesn't respect your right to exist. Well, I mean, that has been the case for many years in many different situations. How do you do that? Well, you do that through military deterrence, right? You create a power balance that they have to respect, right? They might not like the fact that you are there, but they can't do anything about it. And that is the same thing about Hamas and Israel, right?
North Korea is a great
Ham,
example, isn't it? How do
exactly.
you,
How do you do it? Well, you're strong enough that there is just no way around it. They have to accept that you are there and you have the right to be there. And that is, of course, that going to be the basis of any negotiations at some point between Ukraine and Russia, that there has to be sufficiently strong deterrence of Russia that they have to give up the ambitions of dominating Ukraine and gaining the political control over all of that, or let alone rolling back NATO or the European Union and taking other countries in Europe. Military deterrence is the answer to this. That's how you negotiate with someone like that. And that is, of course, a very different thing from offering them some land and hoping that things will be fine.
yeah. And it sort of worked in the Cold War, didn't it? I mean, Russia might have wanted to dominate far more territory than it actually controlled at the end of the World War II. And indeed, they tried to essentially force us out of Berlin. But a show of will and resolve and resources and might, and we're not going anywhere. Same in North Korea, South Korea. South Korea has
But
been armed to the teeth, so it's just not possible to.
And it also worked the other way during the Cold War. We have to acknowledge that as well. It deterred us from actually, we obviously wanted to take some of those countries in the Warsaw Pact and help them be free from communism and all those things. And we did not do that because deterrence worked. So deterrence does work, and it also works on Putin. And it's the only basis really for how you actually can deal with someone like that. And I think that is what we have to somehow get this current hot war in Ukraine channeled into becoming a new Cold War in Europe. As pessimistic as it may sound, that is actually going to be a good outcome if we can somehow get it over there instead of having the hot war escalating into something much more dramatic.
And that includes fortifying our institutions and our informational space as well. And it's a totally other topic. We'll keep it to the kinetic one. A friend of mine calls it the steel porcupine. Turn Ukraine into something which is armed to the teeth and utterly indigestible to a predator. A steel porcupine is a nice illusion there. We're certainly not there yet, but we're starting to, I think, inch in that direction. But there's also the assumption, which was made very clear on the panel, that even pro-Ukraine people like myself who talk about Ukrainian resilience and strength, they made the point that Ukrainian people are not infinite in their psychological and physical strength, and their resources are not infinite. And we cannot count on them to be able to hold the line for many more years under a similar assault without substantial increase in Western support, and not just paying them to do the fighting. At some point, we're going to have to recognize that they're going to need some human resource to hold that line as well.
Mm. My problem with this steel porcupine picture is that I think until 2022, that was actually Ukraine's strategy, right? I think that's why we also saw the Ukrainian government being so reluctant to believe that Russia was going to invade, because they actually believed that they had this steel porcupine in place already, that they had a strong army. And clearly Russia, you can see that this is a strong army, and it's not a good idea to challenge that. And well, apparently Russia could not see that. And so my problem with this idea of just arming Ukraine is that essentially that is what did not work running into 2022. So Ukraine will need to have something more than that. And we will have to find some way to make it even, make the deterrence even stronger.
Yeah.
Uh, it- and unfortunately, NATO membership does not seem to be at all on the table, but something else like
Yeah.
that, somehow we get Ukraine into a broader security structure, I think is going to be necessary.
And JEF, Joint Expeditionary Force, maybe building that up as seems to be happening again is one thing. Another case from history. I know we're going to sort of wind up in a second, but another case from history: the Maginot Line didn't hold against a new form of warfare, and then indeed the Czechoslovakia in the interwar period built an extraordinary military-industrial complex. And had vast quantities of armaments and a highly fortified, highly defensible border, which the British then utterly betrayed and gave to Germany. So again, the steel porcupine doesn't protect you against, let's say, the vagaries of allies and various kinds of hybridized informational warfare and techniques or covert techniques.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I think we'll probably call it a day there. We've got 100 more topics to discuss, but we'll hold those over for another occasion. I think we've dived into some incredibly important issues, and as ever, you're amazingly generous with your time and insight. I know the audience will appreciate Anders. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for everything you do.
Well, always a pleasure.